You're listening to Voice of Israel.
This is Judy Lash-Balint on Jerusalem Diaries at Voice of Israel. So, you might know from my accent by now, those of you that have been listening for a while, that I was born in the UK, Great Britain, England, as it was called when I was born. And even though I spent many years in the United States, I was educated in the UK and grew up in a small community there and read some of the most venerable and respected papers in the world, which are based in London. And by that, I mean publications like the Daily Telegraph, The Economist, The Times of London. The Independent actually didn't exist when I was growing up, but The Guardian, Financial Times, all of those media outlets are considered in the world, I would say, some of the most respected papers in the world. But recently, we have cause to be concerned about the content being published in some of those papers about what is going on here in the Middle East and here in Israel in particular. Those papers have taken a great interest in the Middle East and a great interest in Israel, over and above what our little population would warrant, I think. And one of the organizations that has been created to monitor and try and deal with the situation of UK media is a group called UK Media Watch. And I am joined in the studio by Adam Levick, who is the managing editor of UK Media Watch. Welcome, Adam. Thank you.
Great to be here, Judy.
Thanks for joining me. And Adam, you have a very interesting background, too. You had worked in the States in the Civil Rights Division at the National Office of the Anti-Defamation League, amongst other things. And you've also been published many places here in Israel since you've been in Israel. But tell me a little bit about your work at UK Media Watch. Why do we need a group looking out from Israel about what's happening in the media in the UK?
First, a little background about CIF Watch, which was the precursor to UK Media Watch, which we're just releasing now. CIF Watch was founded in 2009 by a group of activists, pro-Israel activists, who were concerned about the Guardian's coverage of Israel. And with a shoestring budget, they got off the ground and started a blog, and they hired me in 2010. And the goal was to, really put on the map and let people be aware and to give proper notoriety to the Guardian's biased coverage of Israel. And what often was more than that was it actually turned into, oftentimes it pivoted to legitimization of anti-Semitism.
How was that manifested? Give me an example, if you can, of how bad things got before an organization had to come into being to fight that. What were some examples of things that they...
First of all, on their webpage, which is devoted to op-eds and commentary called Comment is Free, almost, I'd say somewhere between 70-80% of the contributors who wrote about Israel-related topics were one-staters. That is, not only did they legitimize the one-state, the Jewish state shouldn't exist viewpoint, but that was almost the dominant viewpoint if you were to read the Guardian's op-ed pages at Comment is Free. And so, people like Ben White, people like Ali Abu Nima, people that not only delegitimized Israel, but didn't believe the Jewish state should exist within any borders. And this was the tenor, this was the tone of the commentary at the Guardian and Comment is Free. And they also tolerated anti-Semitism below the line in the comment section to a degree that was really unusual, considering the fact that they had a team of professional moderators that actually looked at the threads and were supposed to police for those kind of things.
And there is in the UK a specific, what is it, the editor's code of practice. I mean, there's something very specific that does talk specifically about anti-Semitism or about balance.
No, there's the accuracy clause of the UK editor's code, which all newspaper editors are obligated to follow, requires accuracy. And in the cases where accuracy clause is breached, you can file a complaint with the Press Complaints Commission, which is now called IPSO. And in the UK, unlike in other countries, when the Press Complaints Commission rules in the favor of the complainant, the newspaper is forced to retract the claim and publish a correction. So unlike in Israel and the US, where there's different ethos in journalism, in the UK they actually have to heed legitimate complaints and publish retractions.
So that's what made you put together this organization in order to kind of provide a role and a place for people to channel their complaints and to have them responded to.
Exactly.
Now, people might ask, well, okay, so the media's, that particular paper is The Guardian. Now you've broadened out to other British papers for sure. People might say, well, okay, so what? The British press is biased against Israel, blah, blah, blah. What difference does it make? But what we found is that a recent poll indicated, this is an amazing statistic, that over 80% of British Jews now believe that the UK media's coverage of Israel fuels anti-Semitism. And they, as we know, in the UK, are part of Europe, and they have had a tremendous rise in anti-Semitic incidents over just in 2014, actually. And we'll get into that maybe a little bit later. But so clearly, British Jews themselves are thinking that their media coverage is leading to this anti-Semitism. Do you see manifestations of that? How do you see the chain progressing?
Yeah, that's interesting. First, a quick background. In 2014, a British charity by the name of the Community Security Trust, which compiles statistics about anti-Semitism in the UK, put out figures showing that 2014 was the worst year on record in terms of anti-Semitic incidents. And interestingly enough, though the period during the Operation Protective Edge showed the biggest spike, it actually was up overall for the entire year also. But to answer your question in terms of how the chain works, look, if you were to rely on the UK media as your sole source of information for Israel's war against the terrorist group Hamas in July and August of last year, you would generally be convinced that Israel targets innocent Palestinian civilians, and worse, you would possibly believe, based on the reports and commentary and images that they usually publish without context, that Israel malevolently targets innocent Palestinian children. The theme of dead and injured Palestinian children, devoid of context, was probably the most egregious example of incendiary commentary and reports in the UK media during the war, and that it doesn't take much for anti-Semites who are walking around the streets of London in neighborhoods that are compromised by high levels of Islamist extremism to jump on that as an excuse to engage in anti-Semitism and sometimes even attack Jews.
Right. Now, we just this last week had an unbelievable example of this that occurred in the Daily Mail, which I wouldn't put the Daily Mail anywhere in the package with some of the papers that you're following, the Daily Telegraph, the Independent, etc. The Daily Mail is kind of like the National Enquirer of the UK. However, their website is the most popular media website in the world, so you can't kind of dismiss them. But they published a story. Well, you tell the story, Adam, because it was really amazing.
The Daily Mail does have huge circulation, and it's actually similar, just to give American listeners an idea, it's similar to the New York Post. It's tabloidish, but it has news, and it's taken somewhat seriously by, I think Melanie Phillips has referred to their readership as Middle Britain. So wackos aren't reading it, and this is like a mainstream publication that has huge numbers. No, they published a story which was originally published, I think, in Palestinian news agency and Al Jazeera, and then picked up by AFP.
Yes. That
actually claimed that floods in Gaza were caused because Israel intentionally opened dams in the south,
quote unquote.
Quote unquote.
Yes.
Now, the story is so crazy on so many different levels. First of all, there's no dam. Israel has no dams in the south. Second of all, just the idea that a mainstream publication could believe that Israel would be so malicious and so evil that they would unleash floodwaters on innocent Palestinians is just so indicative of the narrative that's been established within the UK media, that the newspaper editors at the Daily Mail looked at that story and they were convinced that this has legs, this is legitimate, this could be possible. They eventually retract the story after a lot of pro-Israel bloggers and a lot of even mainstream outlets said this is a bogus story. But the fact that they believed that, the fact that they thought that was a credible story, I think tells you a lot. It's a striking commentary on the state of the UK media.
Yes, and actually, even the correction, when they published the correction, all they did basically was they took out, the impression. Of course, the impression was left with the reader anyway, because corrections, in my view anyway, corrections can never really do the job to take out of people's minds, what they've put in there as their first impression. But the corrections were pretty feeble because the story was still left there, the pictures were left there, and the impression, as you said, the impression in people's minds was, oh yes, Israel had purposely, flooded these poor Palestinians, and so again, this is leading to attitudes of anti-Jewish, anti-Israel attitudes in the UK, and that is of great concern. What, in your view, is the importance of the UK media in the world of media? How would you rank the importance of the UK media?
It's interesting. I grew up in America for 40 years, and the view of the British media, specifically The Guardian, just to give you an example, the Guardian was regarded. There's something about the British accent. There's something about the British culture that a lot of Americans who look at the media, who read the media, look at The Guardian as what the New York Times would be if they had a little more boldness. They're really speaking truth to power. And so, it kind of has this elite, intelligent, erudite, kind of essence about them that gives them more credibility than is warranted. And so, even though a lot of us insiders, believe that their commentary and their ideological persuasion is far left, outside of our community, a lot of people think that they're a respectable newspaper that has respectable views, and therefore what they say about Israel deserves to be listened to.
Yes, that is true. So, fascinating discussion with Adam Levick of UK Media Watch. We're going to take a quick station break. We'll be back for a lot more. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at VOIsrael. Let us know what you think. Tell us what your thoughts are on our Facebook page at Voice of Israel. This is Judy Lash-Balin, Jerusalem Diaries. We'll be right back.
It's my people, it's my country, and I think we have a right to defend ourselves.
Hey folks, this is Yishai Fleischer. You've heard a lot about student apathy. Well, here's a group of students who are not apathetic.
I started the first pro-Israel group.
It's our right to be here, and I feel like Zionism is freedom, it's not racism. I feel like it's our obligation to be in the land of Israel.
For the full interview of the ZOA student trip to Israel, download the Yishai Fleischer Show only on Voice of Israel.
On Jerusalem Diaries, talking today with Adam Levick, who is the managing editor of UK Media Watch, and we're discussing the situation of the British media and their coverage of Israel and why it is important and why we should be concerned. And again, one of the figures that came out, which kind of blew my mind because it wasn't like that when I lived in England, one of the recent polls showed that in amongst Brits who were polled, Israel is regarded more unfavorably than Iran. Now, this is a 2014 survey. 33%, yes, Israel is regarded definitely more unfavorably by Britons than Iran by a very large percentage. And that is, again, when I grew up, Israel was still in the, how should we put it, the honeymoon phase, you could say, with many British people, because it was a young society, idealistic, socialistic, et cetera, and except for the chattering classes, the upper class strata of British society, who were always anti-Semitic, in my opinion, but kept it at a low ebb, you really didn't hear much of anything. Now, today, again, you're saying it's because of the media, that the media coverage of Israel has resulted in this kind of attitude towards Israel, attitude towards Israel on the part of British people. What can be done about it? What are you guys doing about it?
Well, one of the things that we do at UK Media Watch and at our parent organization, Camera, we've adopted a model whereby we don't just publish blog posts about unfair coverage of Israel and about anti-Semitism. We're in constant contact with UK newspaper editors, news site editors, and producers of networks like Sky News and Channel 4. And when there's problematic coverage, or that is coverage which we feel, again, violates the accuracy clause of the UK Editors Code, we hold them accountable. And we're in constant communication. I have a very good professional relationship with editors at UK newspapers, and we get corrections on false accusations and false passages on a routine basis. So one of the ways that we attack it is by going at the source and challenging false allegations. If we can make a good case that it's false, we get corrections. We also are very active on social media and try to spread the word on Facebook and Twitter. We're extremely active. We have Camera has a letter writing campaign. We really encourage people people that read our material to be activists and not just passive readers. And, it's not easy, and it takes a lot of work and a lot of persistence, but if you know your facts and you approach it seriously, we've in our experience, in Camera's experience, since 1982 they've been around, we've learned that we can really make a difference in the media coverage.
And one of those ways that you're going to make a difference is an event that is coming up this weekend right here in Jerusalem. Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. It's called Framing Israel, Framing Jews, examining the effects of UK media coverage of Israel on European anti-Semitism. And the panel discussion will include probably the most preeminent historian of anti-Semitism, Robert S. Wistrick, who is the head of the Vidal Sassoon Center for the Study of Anti-Semitism. And we're trying to really focus on the topic that we're discussing today, and that is the connection between biased media coverage of Israel and the uptick in anti-Semitism in the UK and in Europe, including, in France and the jihadist attacks that occurred there recently. So in addition to Professor Wistrick, we're going to have myself and my colleague Hadar Sela, who is the managing editor of BBC Watch. And even though we're called UK Media Watch, BBC is such a large corporation and such a large reach, we need an editor just to monitor of all their various parts. And then we're having a woman by the name of Lucille Cohen, who was a Zionist leader in the Manchester Jewish community and was on the Board of Deputies, to discuss about how average Jewish Britons feel day to day reading biased headlines and stories and op-eds about Israel. So it should be a really interesting discussion.
I think it really will be. And again, people will come out with tools, right? You'll be showing people how to actually approach editors, how to make a difference when they actually write letters. I mean, it's amazing. I know as a journalist, people actually, there's not that many concerned individuals out there that do take the time to actually, contact the journalist and say, either politely or not, look, you're wrong, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, so I think the number of people that have been activated to do that by Camera and other organizations and such as yourselves, I think that's a huge plus.
Yeah, exactly. And interestingly, I used to be one of those frustrated armchair activists, and I decided to make a living out of it. So, it hopefully will inspire the next generation of activists. That's our goal, each day that we blog, each day, and certainly this conference.
Now, when you say that's your goal, obviously that's for the event, but overall, what would you say, what would constitute victory in terms of you're a media watchdog? What would constitute victory for you as an individual, as an organization? How would that look?
Well, there's many ways to measure it, but certainly one way you can measure it is in terms of the and negative output. Like, for instance, in 2011, we were able to quantify that there was a lot greater quantity of anti-Israel content of The Guardian than there was 2 years later after our persistent efforts. So that's one way. Another way is just in terms of giving these papers, giving these media groups the notoriety that they deserve. At the end of the day, they'll print and publish what they want to, but if someone's watching them, if someone's publicizing their errors, and someone's consistently calling them out on their libels and their smears against Israel, it's been our experience that they'll think twice. And a perfect example is, CAMRA, the Committee for Accuracy and Middle East Reporting in America, had a several-year campaign against National Public Radio, NPR, which, back when I was living in the States, had a horrible reputation for anti-Israel output. And, I think it's been the assessment of camera professionals that their content has improved through this consistent, steady campaign year after year. So, it's not always easy to measure success, but kind of it when you see it. And the only way to go about it is just day in, day out, going after them for false allegations and calling them out on biased, misleading reporting.
Now, why you've lived in the United States, obviously, and now you're living here in Israel, but you're working on British media. As you mentioned, there are problematic publications in the United States too, but up until now, the results have not been the same. We have not seen these expressions of anti-Semitism coming out in American society to the same extent as they are in Europe. What's your view of why that is?
I think it's safe to say that there's different cultures within the American Jewish community and the British Jewish community. I think for various reasons, American Jews were never expelled the way that British Jews were expelled. It's just my sense as an American, as a former American and Israeli now, and just speaking to British Israelis and people that still live in the UK, that there's more of this, in the UK Jewish community, keeping a low profile, keep your head down, don't make waves. And I think, just to put it bluntly, I think American Jewish community is a little more chutzpahnik. I think that for various reasons, they feel much more bold, much more confident. There's more of them. There's 5.5 million Jews in America. There's, 260,000 in the UK. So, I think Jews in America, the Jewish community feels a little more bold. I think in the UK that there seems to be this sense that, don't make waves. And I think that's changing. I think that's being challenged a little bit. There's a new organization called the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, a grassroots organization. A gentleman by the name of Jonathan Sakardati is part of it. People that are fighting back against this, don't make waves kind of mentality that I think was a failed model. And I think there is a little more aggressive, assertive advocacy now in the British Jewish community and pro-Israel community.
How has the established, organized Jewish world in the UK reacted to your efforts?
In the beginning, when our blog was launched, it was mixed, and there were some people that thought that we were hurting our cause by being too aggressive. But to say that we really made huge strides in gaining people's respect is an understatement. I think they see our result. They saw our results. They saw that our model worked better, that the previous model didn't work better, and that sustained advocacy and sustained communication with editors and blogging, tweeting, sharing on Facebook, and just being in their face about unfair treatment of Israel is much more effective than below the surface and behind the scenes kind of advocacy.
How about meeting with British journalists who are stationed here? Is that part of your role as well?
Look, I mean, if I were to be able to set up a meeting with the Guardian's Jerusalem correspondent Peter Beaumont, or his predecessor Harriet Sherwood, I would. However, I don't think I'm saying anything too controversial by saying that generally they see us as they stay away from us and they are tend to be a little thin-skinned, and it seems unlikely. Now, having said that, there are, within America and certainly within some of the wire services, some of their journalists have been much more upfront about communicating with our organizations. But British journalists tend to be have been, in my experience, a little standoffish, and so far that hasn't happened. Yeah.
Well, one of the things I noticed in my years covering Jerusalem, certainly, is that a lot of what you see, and particularly, I would say, amongst Europeans, for all kinds of reasons, is that you see reporters who see themselves as human rights activists, as part of the story, as opposed to journalists. And part of that comes from the way journalism schools are teaching journalism these days. It's being taught that way, both in America and in Europe, I think. But it's also inherent in the kind of liberal arts education that many journalists get. And they see themselves, as I said, as human rights activists and as components of the story. Do you see that that's a problem? Have you ever encountered that in the coverage that you read?
Yeah, absolutely. In our years of blogging and posting about UK media coverage of Israel, we see some journalists that have been active in boycott Israel movements. A perfect example is the former Guardian Jerusalem correspondent Harriet Sherwood. In her parting shot against Israel, she, up until then she had barely ever written any op-ed. She just stuck to straight news. But her last piece was an op-ed in which she specifically called for a boycott of Israel. Forgetting any sense of her professional responsibilities as a journalist, she just went straight into her advocacy mode. And up until that point, we saw little ticks that would indicate that she was a pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel activist at heart. But that just proved our theory right there. I mean, she joined the BDS movement, here, the professional reporter for one of the most influential British newspapers. There she is calling for BDS. So I think we see examples of that a lot, but that's the best example, I think.
And there you have it. So we've been talking with Adam Levick, a really very fascinating discussion. Adam is the managing editor of UK Media Watch. If you're in Jerusalem, come to the event. It's called Framing Jews. How can people get access to the event, Adam?
Okay, well, they can
Go on your Facebook page, right?
go on our Facebook page, Framing Israel, Framing Jews, or contacting our office at 02-625-3949.
And if you're not in Jerusalem, watch for the reports. This is Judy Lash Balint on Jerusalem Diaries. More great programming on voiceofisrael.com. Follow us on Twitter at VOIsrael. Let us know what you think. Join the conversation on our Facebook page at Voice of Israel. And be sure to stay tuned for more great programming. Judy Lash Balint on Jerusalem Diaries, signing out.
You are listening to Voice of Israel, premier news talk from the heart of Jerusalem. To listen to more great audio, register for our live streaming broadcasts at voiceofisrael.com. Voice of Israel,